The scent of wood smoke and simmering stew cut through the evening air in the Barrington Heights projects, a signal to dozens of hungry families that dinner was ready. For 3 years, Elena Mendez had cooked for her neighborhood over a single fire pit, using donated scraps. She had no idea the man about to taste her food was a billionaire, and he had no idea this meal would dismantle everything he thought he knew about building an empire. Elena's community pot fed over 100 people each week, a lifeline woven from discarded vegetables and donated bones. Marcus Thorne's broken-down luxury car was just another piece of isolation until hunger led him to her table. He was a venture capitalist who built fortunes by betting on disruption. She was a single mother who built a community by refusing to let her neighbors go hungry. Their meeting would spark a radical idea. What if the greatest investment wasn't in technology, but in the people everyone else had overlooked? Elena Mendez never planned to become a community pillar. 3 years earlier, a series of layoffs at the local packaging plant had swept through Barrington Heights, leaving her and dozens of her neighbors without income, without safety nets, and facing empty cupboards. With her own savings gone in 2 months, Elena did the only thing she knew. She took the last of her cash, bought a 50-pound bag of rice and whatever bruised vegetables the discount market was about to throw out, and built a fire in the vacant lot next to her building. She told her son Miguel to invite anyone who was hungry. That first night, 12 people came. Within a month, she was feeding over 50. It was never about charity. It was a pact. Those who could donated $1 or whatever food they could spare, a can of beans, a packet of seasoning. Those who couldn't washed dishes or chopped wood for the fire. Elena's pot became a ritual, a stubborn declaration that in a place the world had written off, no one would eat alone. Meanwhile, 40 miles away in a glass-walled penthouse, Marcus Thorne was finalizing a deal that would net his venture firm, Apex Capital, a return of $300 million. His world was one of leverage, disruption, and exit strategies. He invested in apps that delivered gourmet meals in under 20 minutes, but he had never once considered where that food came from or who it never reached. His success was built on a single, brutal philosophy. Sentiment was a liability. Every decision was a calculation. This mindset had built a billion-dollar empire, but it had also cost him his marriage and left him orbiting a life of profound isolation. The night his car broke down was the night his carefully constructed world finally hit a dead end. He was returning from a contentious board meeting where he had just voted to cut an entire division of a struggling retail chain, a move that would eliminate 2,000 jobs. His driver had called in sick, his phone was dead, and his brand-new electric luxury sedan, a symbol of flawless efficiency, simply shut down on a deserted service road skirting the Barrington Heights neighborhood. Frustrated, Marcus got out. The smell of wood smoke and something rich and savory cut through the damp night air. Following the scent and the faint glow of firelight, he walked into the heart of the projects. What he saw stopped him cold. Under a makeshift tarp strung between 2 buildings, a long line of people, elders, children, men and women still in work uniforms, waited patiently with bowls and containers. At the center was Elena, stirring a massive pot over an open flame, her face glowing in the firelight as she ladled out steaming stew, greeting every person by name. It was a scene of poverty, yes, but also of stunning, tangible community. Marcus watched, his corporate brain unable to categorize it. This wasn't a non-profit, it wasn't a business, it was an ecosystem. Hunger, a sensation he hadn't felt in decades, finally compelled him forward. He took a place at the end of the line, drawing confused glances in his tailored overcoat. When he reached the front, Elena didn't ask questions. She simply handed him a chipped ceramic bowl filled with stew. "Welcome," she said, her voice warm but tired. "Find a seat at the table." The first bite was a revelation. It was rich, complex, deeply nourishing. He ate in silence at the long communal table, listening to the conversations flowing around him, talk of missed rent, a child's good grade, a job interview tomorrow. For the first time in years, Marcus Thorne was not the most important person in the room. He was just another man eating. After the crowd thinned, he approached Elena, who was scrubbing the giant pot with sand and ash. "How much?" he asked, pulling out a thick wallet. Elena didn't look up. "It's not for sale, it's shared." "Then let me make a donation to help." He gestured vaguely at the sparse operation. Now she looked at him, her eyes sharp and assessing. Help with what? The city says this fire is a hazard. The health department calls it a code violation. Last week, someone tried to steal this pot for scrap metal. Your money doesn't fix that. Your money just makes you feel better for 5 minutes on your drive back to where you live. Her bluntness was a shock. No one spoke to him like that. Intrigued and with his car still dead, Marcus stayed. He helped move benches. He listened. He learned that Alina's 12-year-old son Miguel had severe asthma, worsened by the mold in their apartment, but Alina couldn't afford to move. He learned that Ms. Clara, the elderly woman who made the cornbread, was choosing between her heart medication and contributing her pension check to the food fund. He learned that this single pot was the only thing holding back a tidal wave of desperation for over 30 families. A cynical part of his brain began to calculate the liability, the inefficiency, the sheer lack of scalability. But another part, a part he thought he'd excised long ago, was captivated by the raw resilience of it. Here was a problem no app could solve. Here was value that never showed up on a balance sheet. As a freezing drizzle began to fall, Marcus knew he had to leave. His assistant had finally tracked him down and was sending a car. Before he left, he turned to Alina. What you're doing is remarkable, but it's hanging by a thread. You know that, right? Alina banked the fire for the night, her movements deliberate. Everything worthwhile hangs by a thread, mister. The question isn't how thick the thread is, it's how many hands are holding it. Marcus handed her his business card, a sliver of black titanium. If that thread ever feels like it's slipping, call me. Alina took the card, looked at it, and then tossed it into the embers of the fire. It curled and blackened. I don't need a lifeline from your world, she said quietly. My world holds its own. That should have been the end of it. Marcus returned to his life of boardrooms and private equity, but he couldn't forget the taste of that stew or the sight of that community holding its own. A week later, driven by a compulsion he couldn't explain, he went back, not as a billionaire, but with a bag of onions and sweet potatoes he'd bought himself from a market. He didn't offer money. He asked, "What needs chopping?" That single question began the most unlikely partnership of his life. He started showing up every Thursday, learning the rhythms of the kitchen. He met Miguel, a bright boy who loved science but had no access to a real lab. He saw the constant, exhausting hustle Alina faced just to secure the next day's ingredients. The inefficiency he once scorned now looked like heroic adaptability. The lack of scale now looked like profound, human-scale connection. And then one rainy Thursday, the thread finally snapped. The city codes inspector arrived, flanked by a police officer. The complaint had been filed anonymously by a new property management company that had just bought 3 buildings in Barrington Heights. They cited the open fire, the unsanitary conditions, the unpermitted food service. They issued a final order: shut it down permanently or face daily fines and arrest. Alina stood before the inspector, her shoulders slumped in defeat for the first time. The community gathered behind her, a silent wall of despair. This was more than a meal. This was their dignity. This was their safety net. Watching from the edge of the crowd, Marcus Thorne felt a familiar surge, but it wasn't the cold thrill of a corporate takeover. It was white-hot rage. He saw not a code violation, but an injustice. He saw not a messy operation, but a system about to crush the very thing keeping it humane. As the inspector handed Alina the bright yellow condemnation notice, Marcus stepped forward. Everyone turned. In his crisp suit, he was an alien presence. He took the notice from Alina's hands, looked at the inspector, and in a voice of calm, terrifying authority forged in 1,000 high-stakes deals, he made a promise that would change everything. "You can leave now," he said. "This kitchen isn't closing, it's just getting started. And by the time I'm finished, you're going to need a new rulebook." What Marcus proposed next was not a donation. It was not a charity. It was a declaration of war on the very conditions that made Alina's kitchen necessary. And the first casualty of that war would be every assumption Alina had ever made about the man who once tried to burn a $100 bill to light her fire. Marcus didn't wait for a response. He took out his phone, dialed a number, and spoke 4 words that made the city inspector blanch. "Mayor Evans, right now. 20 minutes later, as the drizzle turned to rain, a black town car pulled up. Out stepped not just the mayor, but the city's head of urban development and a wary-looking public health director. Marcus Thorne had just mobilized the city's entire executive apparatus to a vacant lot in Barrington Heights. He didn't greet them as politicians. He addressed them as a board of directors who had failed a critical audit. He pointed at the fire pit, at the gathering families, and at Alina. "This," he said, his voice cutting through the rain, "is not a problem. This is the solution to a problem you've spent millions ignoring. Your job today is not to shut it down. Your job is to figure out how to replicate it." What followed was a tense, 2-hour negotiation under the tarp. Marcus, using the language of systems and scalable impact, reframed Alina's kitchen. It wasn't an illegal food operation. It was a hyper-efficient, zero-waste, community-governed nutrition distribution node. The health director argued about permits and stainless steel. Marcus countered by asking for the rate of foodborne illness in the city's licensed, for-profit restaurants versus the rate from this fire pit, which was 0. The development head cited zoning. Marcus produced, from his phone, satellite maps of 12 other vacant lots in food deserts across the city. "You have the land, we have the model," he said. "The question is whether you have the vision." By nightfall, a temporary compromise was struck. The city would issue a 90-day emergency community food provision permit, waiving the usual fees. In return, Marcus would personally fund and oversee the immediate construction of a safe, permitted outdoor kitchen structure on the site, to be designed in consultation with Alina and the health department. The fire pit would be retired, replaced with proper commercial equipment. The inspector left, defeated and confused. The community erupted in hesitant joy, but Alina was quiet. She pulled Marcus aside as the officials drove away. "You bought us time," she said, "but you also made them a promise. What happens in 90 days when your interest fades and we're left with a stainless steel shed we can't afford to run?" Marcus looked at her, and for the first time he let his corporate mask slip entirely. "Alina, I'm not building you a shed. I'm not even building you a restaurant. I am going to help you build an argument. One so compelling that the city, the state, and every cynical billionaire like me will have to listen." The next morning, Marcus's resources moved with terrifying speed. A construction crew arrived at dawn. An architect presented Alina with designs not for a simple kitchen, but for a beautiful open-air pavilion with a commercial kitchen, covered seating for 100, and even a small play area for children. The budget was $750,000. Alina laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. "This is a fantasy. My entire life isn't worth this much." Marcus shook his head. "Your community's health, its cohesion, its ability to care for its own, that's priceless. This is just the tool, but tools require skilled hands." He then made his second move. He called a meeting of the 30 most regular members of the kitchen community. He didn't speak to them as beneficiaries. He spoke to them as founding stakeholders. He proposed the Barrington Heights Community Food Cooperative. Alina would be the executive director. Every adult who contributed labor or resources would be a voting member. The pavilion would be owned by the cooperative, held in a community land trust, so it could never be sold to developers. Profits from any future catering or meal subscription services would be reinvested into the cooperative, into healthcare stipends, emergency grants, and scholarships for kids like Miguel. The room was silent, then buzzed with a nervous, hopeful energy. This was more than saving their meals. This was about owning their future. Ms. Clara raised a trembling hand. "And who pays for this dream, Mr. Thorne? Angels don't fund co-ops." Marcus smiled, a genuine one. "This angel does. I'm making a 5-year, interest-free loan to the cooperative. You pay it back on your own terms when you can. My return on investment isn't financial, it's proof." Proof, he explained to Alina later, was the most valuable commodity. Proof that a community-led model could not only feed people, but create jobs, improve health outcomes, and stabilize a neighborhood more effectively than any top-down government program or predatory real estate deal. If they could make it work here, it could be replicated. It could become a blueprint. But blueprints attract those who want to tear them down. The property management company that had filed the original complaint, Greystone Holdings, was not pleased. Their plan for Barrington Heights was part of a silent citywide strategy: buy up distressed properties, let conditions deteriorate, file nuisance complaints against community fixtures like Alina's kitchen to push out remaining tenants, then petition the city for rezoning to build high-rent mixed-use developments. Alina's kitchen and now Marcus's pavilion were a spanner in the works. A week into construction, the first counterattack came. A city councilman, a man named Donovan, who had received significant campaign donations from Greystone's parent company, held a press conference. He stood in front of a derelict building a few blocks away and spoke of the dangerous precedent of allowing unregulated structures in residential areas. He invoked safety, property values, and the slippery slope of special treatment. He never mentioned Marcus or Alina by name, but the message was clear. This was an outsider imposing his will on a neighborhood, using his wealth to bypass the rules that applied to everyone else. The local news aired the segment. Suddenly, the narrative was no longer about a community kitchen, but about a billionaire's vanity project. Online comment sections filled with vitriol, calling Alina a pawn and Marcus a gentrifier. The 90-day permit was now under political scrutiny. Alina felt the ground shifting beneath her again. The community's initial euphoria turned to anxiety. Were they selling their soul for a stainless steel stove? Marcus, accustomed to hostile takeovers, saw this for what it was, a smear campaign designed to apply political pressure. His response was to double down on transparency. He invited the same news station to a community meeting, but on his terms. He didn't speak. He had Alina and the cooperative members run the entire event. They presented their business plan, their governance structure, their dream for a community garden on the adjacent lot. Ms. Clara spoke about her medication. A young mother talked about the relief of knowing her children had a hot meal. Miguel, holding a model of the pavilion he helped design, explained how the rainwater collection system would work. The broadcast was powerful, human, and it swung public sentiment, but it also painted a bigger target on their backs. Greystone Holdings shifted tactics. The next day, Alina received a formal offer to purchase her apartment building, along with letters delivered to every other tenant offering them $5,000 to vacate within 30 days. It was a blatant attempt to dismantle the community the kitchen relied on. If the people left, the cooperative would fail. Marcus recognized this move too. It was a classic leverage play straight out of his own world. But here, the assets weren't companies, they were people's homes. He couldn't just buy the building himself. That would validate every claim of gentrification. He needed a weapon they didn't expect. He spent the next 48 hours digging, using his firm's research analysts to trace the ownership of Greystone Holdings. The paper trail led through a series of shell companies, finally landing at a private equity firm based in Delaware, a firm that, it turned out, was a direct competitor to a subsidiary of Apex Capital. Marcus had just found his leverage. He arranged a meeting, not with Greystone's local lackeys, but with the managing partner of the private equity firm in a skyscraper 3 states away. He didn't mention Barrington Heights. He talked about market saturation, about regulatory headaches in multifamily housing, about a more profitable alternative his analysts had uncovered. By the end of the lunch, he had brokered a quiet deal. The private equity firm would instruct Greystone to divest its holdings in Barrington Heights and focus on other markets. In return, Marcus's firm would steer a lucrative deal their way in another sector. It was a cold, billion-dollar transaction that, as a side effect, saved a neighborhood. When Alina heard that the buyout offers had been rescinded, she stared at Marcus, searching for the catch. How was all she could ask. "I spoke their language," he said simply. The pavilion was completed in a breathtaking 60 days. The grand opening was a block party for the ages. The fire pit was ceremonially extinguished, its coals buried to mark the end of an era. The new kitchen, all gleaming steel and warm wood, was a palace. The cooperative had its first official board meeting and signed the loan documents with Marcus. For the first time, Alina Mendez was the signatory on a 7-figure agreement. She cooked the inaugural meal in the new space. The same stew, now made in a 60-gallon steam kettle. It tasted exactly the same. In that moment of triumph, watching the community celebrate under the solid roof of the pavilion, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. He had done it. He had applied his skills to a real problem and fixed it. He thought the story was reaching its end. But Alina approached him, holding 2 bowls of stew. She handed him one. "It's good," she said, nodding at the pavilion. "It's real, but you made one mistake, Marcus." He frowned. "What mistake?" "You think you built this for us," she said, her gaze steady. "You didn't. You built it with us. There's a difference. And if you really believe in your proof, then the work isn't finished when the building is. It's finished when we don't need you anymore." Her words hung in the air. Marcus realized she was right. The infrastructure was just step one. The real test was sustainability. Could the cooperative run it, grow it, and truly own it? The following Monday, that test began in earnest. The kitchen launched its first revenue-generating service, Family Meals, a weekly subscription where families in the wider city could pay for nutritious, ready-to-heat dinners prepared by the cooperative, with a free meal donated to a Barrington Heights family for every one sold. It was Alina's idea, a bridge between the neighborhood and the city. The launch was modest, promoted through community churches and local blogs. They hoped for 50 subscriptions. They got 500 in the first week. The demand was overwhelming. The cooperative's 4 hired cooks, all women from the neighborhood trained by Alina, were suddenly working 16-hour days. The gleaming kitchen was in chaos. Orders were missed. Quality suffered. The 5-star reviews on the subscription site began to mix with 1-star complaints about late deliveries and missing items. The pressure threatened to fracture the fledgling team. This wasn't a hostile corporation attacking them. This was their own success, accelerating faster than their capacity. Marcus saw the operational meltdown and immediately shifted into crisis management mode. He wanted to bring in a professional operations manager, a logistics firm. Alina refused. "If we bring in your people, it becomes your system again. We have to learn, we have to fail a little, we have to fix it ourselves." But the failures were costing them their reputation and their revenue. The tension between Marcus's instinct for efficiency and Alina's commitment to organic, communal learning reached a breaking point during a heated board meeting. It was their first real fight. Voices were raised. Ms. Clara finally banged her walking stick on the floor. "Enough," she shouted. "This bickering is what they expect. We are not a corporation and we are not just a family. We are something new, so act like it." The silence that followed was heavy. Marcus looked around the table at the faces of the cooperative members, tired, scared, but determined. He had a sudden, jarring insight. For all his talk of proof and systems, he had been trying to scale a feeling, a spirit. And you can't scale a feeling with a spreadsheet. You scale it by replicating the conditions that create it: trust, ownership, and shared purpose. He made a decision that would ultimately define the entire venture. He stood up and apologized. Then he made a new proposal. He would not hire outsiders. Instead, he would fund a cooperative academy. He would pay for the most successful members of the Barrington Heights Cooperative, Alina, their lead cook, their bookkeeper, to become trainers. Their first project. To help 2 other struggling community kitchens in different parts of the city form their own cooperatives, using their model, their lessons, their hard-won knowledge. Barrington Heights would become a mentor, not just a beneficiary. It was a stroke of genius. It shifted the mission from scaling a single kitchen to propagating a virus of self-determination. Alina finally saw his vision clearly, and it mirrored her own deepest belief. True help isn't giving someone a fish, or even teaching them to fish. It's helping them build their own sustainable pond, and then showing their neighbors how to do the same. The chaos in the kitchen slowly came under control as the team developed their own systems, their own shortcuts, their own pride of ownership. The subscription service stabilized and began turning a real profit. The first month's surplus was just over $3,000. At the next board meeting, the members voted unanimously on how to spend it, not on kitchen upgrades, but to create a small emergency medical fund for the neighborhood. Marcus was witnessing the birth of a true social enterprise, one that generated both economic and social capital. He was preparing a major report on the project's first-year outcomes to present to his skeptical partners at Apex Capital, believing he had the conclusive data to prove this was a viable, replicable investment model. He was, in his mind, ready to declare victory. That's when the certified letter arrived. It was not from the city or a competitor. It was from the Internal Revenue Service. It was a formal notice of audit. The letter stated that the substantial, interest-free loan from Marcus Thorne to the Barrington Heights Community Food Cooperative was under review as a potential disguised gift, which could trigger massive, retroactive tax liabilities for the cooperative, liabilities that would bankrupt it instantly. Furthermore, it questioned the non-profit status of the cooperative's activities, suggesting the meal subscription service constituted unrelated business income. Someone had meticulously and maliciously reported them. The timing was not an accident. It was a precision strike aimed at the project's financial heart, engineered to look like a routine regulatory action. As Marcus read the dense legalese, a cold certainty settled in his gut. The fight with Greystone Holdings was over. This was a new enemy, one who understood not just real estate, but finance, law, and how to use bureaucracy as a weapon. This enemy wasn't trying to push them out. They were trying to annihilate them from the inside out, and they had just fired the first shot in a war Marcus didn't even know he was fighting. The IRS audit was a masterstroke. It wasn't an attack on the balance sheet, it was an attack on trust. Overnight, the cooperative's bank accounts were frozen pending review, the subscription meal service ground to a halt. Vendors, many of them small local farms that had come to rely on the cooperative's business, demanded payment. The $3,000 emergency medical fund was locked away. Fear, that old and familiar enemy, returned to Barrington Heights. Whispers started. Had Marcus set them up for a fall? Was this all an elaborate tax scheme? Marcus mobilized his legal team, a battalion of corporate attorneys who billed more per hour than the cooperative's monthly payroll. Their initial assessment was grim. The loan structure, while well-intentioned, was vulnerable. The interest-free, open-ended terms did look like a gift. The audit could take 18 months, and just the legal costs to defend it would cripple them. There was only one way out: convert the loan into a formal equity investment or a grant, but that would require reclassifying the cooperative, a process even more complex. They were trapped in a legal labyrinth. Elena watched the hope drain from her neighbors' faces. She called an emergency meeting in the pavilion, now feeling more like a gilded cage. "We have two choices," she said, her voice flat. "We let the lawyers fight this in some faraway office, and we become spectators in our own collapse, or we fight it here on our own terms by proving what we are is real." She proposed a radical move. They would voluntarily pause all paid services. They would go back to basics, to the fire pit if they had to, feeding anyone who came with whatever they could source through direct donation. No money would change hands. It was a step back in time, a strategic retreat to their roots to prove their core mission was non-negotiable. Marcus argued it was financial suicide. Elena countered that their survival was never about finance, it was about faith. The community voted with Elena. The stainless steel kitchen went silent. The fire pit was relit in the lot next to the pavilion. The message to the world was clear: you can audit our books, but you cannot audit our purpose. This act of defiance bought them breathing room in the court of public opinion, but not with the IRS. Marcus needed to find the source of the complaint. His investigators hit a wall. The filing was anonymous, routed through layers of professional tax advocacy firms. It was clean, untraceable. This was the work of someone who knew how to weaponize bureaucracy without leaving fingerprints. The enemy was invisible. Then a break came from an unexpected place. Miguel, Elena's son. He had been quietly building a website for the cooperative's meal service. Bored one afternoon during the shutdown, he was looking through the back-end data, the digital footprints of their subscribers. He noticed a cluster of subscription sign-ups in the first week from email addresses that all followed a similar pattern: random letters and numbers at the same domain. They had all paid with different credit cards, but the IP addresses, the digital locations of the computers used, were all from the same corporate network block. He showed Marcus the data. These weren't real customers. They were bots, designed to artificially inflate demand during their launch, guaranteeing the operational chaos that followed. Marcus's blood ran cold. The attack hadn't started with the IRS, it had started the moment they launched. Someone had engineered their initial failure, making them look incompetent, priming them for the kill shot. This was a coordinated, long-game sabotage. He traced the IP block. It led to the servers of Thorne Enterprises. Not Apex Capital, his firm. Thorne Enterprises, his father's company. Robert Thorne, Marcus's estranged father, was a legendary, ruthless industrialist who had built his fortune on chemicals and manufacturing. He viewed Marcus's venture capital world as speculative fluff and his son's recent community project as a pathetic, sentimental embarrassment. They hadn't spoken in 3 years. The discovery felt like a physical blow. This wasn't a business rival or a real estate shark. This was his own family. Confronting his father was a war Marcus had avoided for a decade. He drove to the agging, fortress-like headquarters of Thorne Enterprises. The meeting was short and brutal. Robert Thorne didn't deny it. He leaned back in his leather chair, a patriarch surrounded by the artifacts of a harder era. "I did you a favor, Marcus. You were drifting, getting soft, attaching your name to a soup kitchen. You were becoming a laughingstock. I applied pressure. True value reveals itself under pressure. And look." He gestured as if the evidence was all around them. "Your little charity is crumbling. Now you can come back to real work." Marcus realized the horrifying truth. His father hadn't attacked the cooperative out of malice toward Barrington Heights. He had attacked it out of a twisted sense of paternal care to rescue his son from his own empathy. The IRS audit, the bot subscriptions, it was all a brutal lesson in what his father considered real power, the power to break things. Marcus left his father's office with a new, chilling clarity. The enemy was no longer a faceless corporation. It was the very ideology he had been raised with, the one he had carried with him into that first meeting with Alina. The ideology that said sentiment was a liability. His father was just its purest embodiment. He returned to Barrington Heights and told Alina everything. He expected rage, betrayal, a demand that he leave. Instead, Alina listened silently, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she asked a simple question. "What does your father value most?" "Legacy," Marcus answered immediately. "Control, his name on buildings." Alina nodded slowly. "Then that's what we take away." She didn't mean a physical fight. She meant a narrative one. With Marcus's approval, she reached out to an investigative journalist from a major metropolitan newspaper, one known for deep-dive profiles on power. She offered full, unfiltered access to the cooperative's books, their meetings, their struggles. She offered the story of the fire pit, the pavilion, the IRS audit, and the discovery of the saboteur. But she framed it not as a tale of a billionaire's charity, but as a case study in two competing visions of America, one that hoards legacy and one that builds it communally. The journalist was intrigued. For 2 weeks, she embedded in Barrington Heights. She interviewed Ms. Clara about her medicine. She worked a shift chopping vegetables. She attended a cooperative meeting where members debated using their last cash reserves, donations kept in a literal cookie jar, to help a family facing eviction. She also secured an interview with Robert Thorne, who, arrogant and confident, gladly opined on the inefficiency of charity and the need for disciplined capital. The article published on a Sunday morning. Its headline was a gut punch. The Recipe for Power, One Kitchen's War on a Billionaire's Legacy. It was a masterpiece of contrast. It detailed the cold, algorithmic sabotage ordered by Robert Thorne. It juxtaposed this with the cooperative's transparent, agonizing decision to use their cookie jar fund to save their neighbor's home, which they did in a unanimous vote. The court of public opinion, which had been swayed by smears before, now rendered a furious verdict. Robert Thorne was vilified. News channels picked up the story. Social media erupted. Barrington's strong trended. The pressure shifted instantly. The IRS, sensitive to political perception, suddenly found a pathway to expedite the audit. Within days, a resolution was offered. The loan could be restructured as a long-term, low-interest community development note, backed by a legitimate philanthropic foundation. The frozen accounts were released. The siege was over. They had won. The pavilion kitchen roared back to life. The subscription service relaunched to record demand. The cooperative was not just saved, it was stronger, its story now a shield. Marcus felt a surge of triumph. He had defeated his father's cynicism with transparency. He had validated Alina's faith in community. He began drafting his grand report to Apex Capital, now with an irresistible human story attached to the data. He envisioned a new fund, the Cooperative Futures Fund, to scale the model nationally. He saw a legacy finally untethered from his father's shadow. But Alina remained cautious. "You won a battle against a man," she told him. "You haven't beaten the system he represents. That system doesn't give up. It adapts." She was right. 2 weeks after the article's publication, a man in an impeccably cheap suit visited the pavilion. He wasn't from the city or the IRS, he was from the Business Integrity Commission, a little-known regulatory body with power over certain city permits. He was polite, apologetic even. He had received concerns about the large-scale food production happening in a residentially zoned area, concerns about traffic, about waste disposal. He was just there to ask a few questions. His questions were technical, tedious, and deeply invasive. He wanted waste hauling manifests. He wanted certified logs of pest control. He wanted the professional certifications of every person who handled food. The cooperative, run by home cooks turned professional chefs, didn't have these documents in the perfect order he demanded. He left saying a formal review would follow, a process that could take 6 months, during which their operating permit could be suspended. This was the system adapting. It had swapped the brute force of Robert Thorne for the slow, suffocating squeeze of bureaucratic compliance. They were out of the legal labyrinth and into a maze of red tape. Marcus, furious, was ready to call the mayor again to unleash another barrage of political pressure. Alina stopped him. "No," she said, "this is different. This is the system working as designed. It's designed to be so complex, so expensive to navigate that only the biggest players can survive. If we fight it with your money and your connections, we prove we're just another special interest. We have to beat it at its own game. We have to become compliant." But becoming compliant cost money, money for consultants, for lawyers specializing in city code, for certified training programs. The cooperative's profits were still slim. This was the final, perfect trap, regulate them into financial exhaustion. Just as despair began to set in, an email arrived. It was from the director of Feed Kitchens, a non-profit shared commercial kitchen incubator in another state, one of the models Marcus had researched months earlier. The director had read the article. She offered a solution, a partnership. Feed Kitchens would provide the Barrington Heights Cooperative with pro bono compliance consulting, access to their legal templates, and virtual training for their staff to get certified. In return, the Barrington Heights Cooperative would become the pilot for Feed's new Community Kitchen Compliance Toolkit, a step-by-step guide to help other grassroots groups navigate the exact regulatory maze they were stuck in. It was the Cooperative Academy idea, but elevated to a national scale. Their problem was not unique, it was the universal barrier to entry. By solving it for themselves, with help, they could create the tools to solve it for thousands of others. This was the true scaling Marcus had been searching for, not scaling a kitchen, but scaling the ability for communities to build their own kitchens. The partnership was a lifeline. As the cooperative worked through the compliance checklist, a new sense of professional pride emerged. They weren't just cooks, they were social entrepreneurs mastering a complex system. Ms. Clara, of all people, took charge of documenting their food safety protocols, her meticulous nature perfect for the task. Marcus finally completed his report for Apex Capital. It contained the hard data. The cooperative was now financially sustainable, had created 12 living wage jobs, had improved health outcomes in the neighborhood according to local clinic reports, and had increased property stability. But its most powerful asset, he argued, was its intellectual property, the proven model, the governance structure, and now the forthcoming compliance toolkit. He proposed the Cooperative Futures Fund, not as charity, but as a hybrid investment vehicle that blended modest financial returns with massive, measurable social impact. He presented it to the Apex Capital partners, a room of men and women who thought in decades and decimal points. He showed them before and after satellite images of the vacant lot. He showed them graphs of reduced emergency room visits for malnutrition-related issues in the zip code. He showed them the subscription revenue growth. Then he showed them a photo of the first cooperative meeting in the new pavilion, a group of ordinary people making extraordinary decisions. "This," he said, "is the most disruptive technology I have ever seen. It doesn't break markets. It builds communities, which are the foundation of all stable markets. This is the future of impact investing." The room was silent. then broke into a mix of skeptical frowns and intrigued nods. They agreed to a pilot fund of $25 million, a pittance by their standards, but a monumental validation of the model. Marcus had done it. He had moved the needle in the hardest room in his world. He returned to Barrington Heights that evening, eager to share the victory. He found Alina not in the kitchen, but sitting at the old communal table in the pavilion, alone, staring at a single sheet of paper. She didn't look up as he approached. Her face was pale, her expression one of someone who had been physically struck. "Alina, what is it?" he asked, his triumph evaporating. She slid the paper across the table to him. It was a formal notice, but not from the city. It was from a law firm representing Apex Capital Partners Fund 3, LP. It was a preliminary letter of intent to purchase, through a complex set of transactions, the entire block of buildings surrounding the pavilion, including the land the pavilion stood on. The stated purpose was consolidation of assets for future mixed-use redevelopment aligned with the fund's strategic urban revitalization goals. Marcus's own signature was not on it, but his fund was. His partners, using the very data and valuation metrics from his own triumphant report, had identified Barrington Heights not as a community to invest in, but as an undervalued asset to acquire. The system hadn't been defeated. It had co-opted his victory. The report he wrote to save the cooperative had become the blueprint for its potential destruction. The greatest threat to Alina's world was no longer his father, or the IRS, or city bureaucracy. It was his own life's work, coming home to roost. For a long minute, Marcus Thorne could only stare at the letter, the crisp Apex Capital letterhead blurring before his eyes. The numbers, the projections, the strategic revitalization, it was all his own language, refined over a decade, now reflected back at him like a funhouse mirror of his own hypocrisy. He had handed them the map, and they had followed it right to the treasure, blind to the people living on top of it. "You didn't know," Alina stated. "It wasn't a question." "No," Marcus whispered, the word ash in his mouth, "but I built the machine that did this. I taught it how to think." He drove back to the Apex Capital Tower that night, not as a managing partner, but as a stranger in his own home. He went straight to the office of Liam Carter, the senior partner who had championed the $25 million pilot fund. Liam was still at his desk, celebrating what he saw as a visionary double play, social impact data, and a killer real estate play. Marcus didn't sit. He placed the letter of intent on Liam's desk. "Kill it." Liam glanced at the paper, then back at Marcus with a pitying smile. "Marcus, come on, this is the asterisk payoff asterisk. The data from your pet project showed massive untapped potential in that zip code. Property values are artificially depressed. The community cohesion you measured, that's a premium feature for future tenants. We're not evicting anyone. We're asterisk curating a mixed income." "They are not a asterisk feature asterisk, Liam," Marcus's shout echoed in the glass-walled office. "They are the architects. You're planning to buy the blueprint out from under the architects." Liam's smile vanished, replaced by cold, professional detachment. "Then they should have patented it. This is what we do, Marcus. We identify value, we aggregate assets, we create efficiency. Your report was brilliant. It showed us how to do it with a smile. Now either you're on the bus or you're under it. The fund votes on the acquisition tomorrow. I suggest you get some sleep and remember which side your fortune is buttered on." Marcus left. He spent the night packing his penthouse, staring at the city lights, each one representing a transaction, a deal, a system he had mastered. He thought of Alina's fire pit. He thought of Ms. Clara's medicine. He thought of Miguel's future. He had spent a year trying to graft his world onto theirs. Now his world was trying to consume theirs. The choice was no longer theoretical. It was brutal and final. The next morning, he arrived at the partners' meeting early. When the acquisition of the Barrington Heights block came up for vote, Liam presented it as a logical, even benevolent, consolidation. He painted a picture of upgraded housing, new retail, a strengthened community. Then he called for the vote. Marcus stood up. "I have a conflict to declare," he said, his voice clear in the silent room. Every head turned. "My primary loyalty is no longer to this fund's maximum financial return. It is to the community outlined in that report. Therefore, I am exercising my right as a founding partner to veto any investment I deem detrimental to the fund's stated social impact principles." A stunned silence fell, then uproar. A veto hadn't been used in 15 years. It was a nuclear option, a breach of the tribe's code. Liam stared at him, incredulous. "You'll destroy your standing here. You'll forfeit your share of the carried interest on this fund. Millions, Marcus." "I know," Marcus said. He gathered his papers. "Consider my position at Apex Capital resigned, effective immediately. My shares in the pilot fund will be transferred into a blind trust for the benefit of the Barrington Heights Cooperative, with Elena Mendez as the sole trustee." He walked out of the boardroom for the last time. The elevator ride down felt like a descent from a mountain he had spent his life climbing. He felt lighter than he had in years. He drove straight to Barrington Heights and called a meeting of the cooperative in the pavilion. He told them everything: the veto, his resignation, the transfer of his interest. He offered no grand speech. He simply said, "I'm sorry it took this to see clearly. The fight is yours now, but you have all the weapons you need." The cooperative members listened, their faces a mix of awe and concern. Ms. Clara spoke first. "Child, what did you give up?" "Nothing I needed," Marcus replied honestly. Elena then stood. She looked at Marcus, then at her community. "Apex Capital will be back, maybe not this year, but someday. Another fund, another letter. As long as we sit on land someone else wants to profit from, we are vulnerable." She paused, letting the truth settle. "So we remove the target, we make it untouchable." Her idea was audacious. Using the capital from the now secure subscription service, plus the value of Marcus's transferred shares, the cooperative would make a counteroffer, not to buy the whole block, but to buy the single parcel of land under the pavilion from the city, which still owned the vacant lot. Then, they would place that land into a permanent, irrevocable community land trust. A CLT is a nonprofit that owns land forever, leasing it at affordable rates to residents or community organizations. The pavilion and the land it stood on would be owned by the community, for the community in perpetuity. No developer could ever touch it. It was a complex, lengthy legal process, but it was the ultimate defense. Marcus, using his now unemployed legal contacts, worked pro bono to structure the deal. The city, still sensitive from the publicity of the newspaper article, agreed to sell the parcel at a below-market rate to the newly formed Barrington Heights Community Land Trust. The day the papers were signed, they held another celebration. There was no ribbon cutting. Instead, they buried a time capsule next to the pavilion's foundation. In it, they placed the first rusty spoon from the original fire pit, a copy of the IRS audit letter, the newspaper article, and a photo of the first cooperative meeting. They also included the blackened, twisted remnant of Marcus's titanium business card, fished from the ashes of the fire a year prior. As the sun set, Marcus stood with Elena, watching Miguel teach younger kids about the rainwater system. "It's done," Marcus said. "It's truly yours now." Elena shook her head. "Not yet. There's one thing left." She handed him a simple envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a formal offer. The Barrington Heights Community Food Cooperative was offering Marcus Thorne a full-time, salaried position as its Director of Strategic Partnerships. The salary was less than he used to pay in monthly parking fees. His mandate would be to use his network not to raise charity, but to forge the partnerships they needed to launch the Cooperative Academy and the Compliance Toolkit nationally, to help other communities build their own untouchable foundations. Marcus looked from the paper to Elena's face. "You're hiring me." "We're adopting you," she corrected, a small smile finally touching her lips. "But you have to understand, you'll be an employee, you report to the board. Ms. Clara will be your direct supervisor for the first 6 months." A laugh burst from Marcus's chest, loud and free. It was the sound of a man who had finally found his place, not at the head of the table, but as a welcome member of it. He accepted. The story doesn't end with a magical cure for poverty. Barrington Heights is still a working-class neighborhood facing challenges, but the center now holds. The kitchen serves 200 meals a day. The cooperative employs 23 people from the community. The emergency fund has helped 14 families avoid eviction. And the first satellite project, a community kitchen in a struggling neighborhood across town, opened its doors last month, staffed by 2 women trained in the Barrington Heights Pavilion. Marcus Thorne's former partners at Apex Capital did eventually launch a community impact real estate fund. It is moderately successful. They never set foot in Barrington Heights again. The final surprising detail is not about money or scale. It's about a single metric tracked by the local health clinic. In the year before the pavilion, there were 47 documented cases of severe childhood asthma complications in the neighborhood's zip code requiring emergency care. In the year after, there were 19. The clinic director attributes it directly to 2 things: the consistent nutrition provided by the kitchen and the fact that Miguel, Elena's son, used the first scholarship fund created by the cooperative to study environmental science. His senior project was a grant-winning initiative to identify and remediate mold in 43 neighborhood apartments, including his own. The boy who struggled to breathe in the old system is now literally cleaning the air for his community. That is the compounding interest of true investment. Marcus learned that the greatest returns are not measured on a spreadsheet, but in the quiet stability of a meal shared, in the dignity of a job that serves your home, in the breath of a child who can now sleep soundly. He went looking to fix a broken-down car and found a broken-down definition of success. Elena Mendez never wanted a benefactor. She needed an ally. Together, they proved that the most powerful economic model isn't extraction or charity. It is solidarity, baked into the very deed of the land. The fire pit is gone, but the light it cast continues to spread, not as a raging blaze, but as a constellation of steady, enduring flames, each one proof that a community that feeds itself owns itself. And that is something no market can ever disrupt. We often frame stories of poverty and wealth as opposites, the haves and the have-nots, the giver and the receiver. But the true story of Barrington Heights reveals a more profound, more challenging truth. It is a story of 2 forms of wealth colliding. One was stored in bank accounts and stock portfolios, massive but isolated. The other was stored in relationships, in shared knowledge, in the stubborn will to care for one's neighbor, fragile at first glance, but infinitely renewable. The real transformation wasn't when money flowed into the neighborhood. It was when a different kind of value flowed out and changed a man who thought he had everything to give. The lesson here isn't that billionaires should fund soup kitchens. It's that the solutions to our deepest crises, food insecurity, housing instability, social fragmentation, are already being built in the places we've been taught to ignore. They are being built by the Elenas of the world, not with venture capital, but with courage and pots and firewood. The question is whether the Marcuses of the world are wise enough to listen, humble enough to follow, and brave enough to ultimately confront the very systems that made them rich. This is not a fairy tale, it's a blueprint. It shows that investment, when stripped of extraction, can mean investing in people's ability to own their own futures. It shows that the most powerful structure you can build isn't a skyscraper, but a trust, a legal, financial, and moral trust between people. Elena Mendez still cooks in the pavilion most days. Marcus Thorne still reports to Ms. Clara. The fire is out, but the warmth remains, radiating outward. Their story asks each of us a simple, uncomfortable question. In the economy of your own life, what are you truly investing in? Are you building monuments to your own legacy, or are you tending the gardens that will feed generations you'll never meet? The miracles we need don't descend from on high. They simmer, quietly, in the most unexpected places, waiting for us to have the sense to pull up a chair and taste what's being offered. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that change is possible and that it often starts with a single pot, a single act of trust. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell for more journeys into the human spirit, where we discover that the most extraordinary ventures are always, ultimately, shared. Until next time.